My hospital roommate told me her husband destroyed her life. I wish I were making this up. I wish this were just some overdramatic internet horror story, but I was there. I saw the aftermath. I sat beside her as she whispered her story, piece by piece, with the last of her strength. And when she was gone, the world moved on. They forgot her. But I won't. So here it is. Her name was Ada. And once upon a time, she had everything. She was the kind of woman people envied, smart, beautiful, wealthy, and kind. She came from old money, the type of family that built its fortune over generations. Her father was a businessman who owned a series of factories, and he adored her. He made sure she was protected, even making her promise to get a prenup before marriage. He knew the world wasn't always kind to women like her. But even he couldn't predict the man she'd marry. Daniel. Daniel was everything she thought she wanted. A man who seemed perfect, who knew how to listen, how to be patient, how to make her feel safe. He wasn't born into wealth, but he worked hard and always told her he wanted to build something with her. Ada saw that as love. She thought he was genuine. They got married, had 2 kids, and for 5 years, Ada believed she was living a fairy tale. Until it all unraveled. It started with an accident. The kids were playing outside, and one of them fell hard enough to need medical attention. A standard test was run for a blood transfusion. Daniel's blood type wasn't a match. At first, Ada thought it was a mistake. But further testing confirmed it, neither child was biologically his. Daniel didn't react with anger, at least not in public. No, he played the part of the devastated husband, the betrayed father. He told everyone that Ada had lied to him for years, that she had broken their family apart. His performance was flawless. And the world believed him. Ada tried to defend herself. She begged, pleaded, swore she had never been with anyone else in her life. But her protests fell on deaf ears. Her friends turned their backs on her. Her in-laws shunned her. Even her extended family stopped answering her calls. Daniel filed for divorce. Her inheritance? Gone. Her reputation? Destroyed. Her children? Turned against her. The court gave him everything. The perfect, heartbroken father who had stood by his wife only to find out she had supposedly deceived him. The judge barely looked in her direction before ruling in his favor. And that was it. Her life, as she knew it, was over. What no one knew, what no one even thought to question, was that Daniel had planned everything. Daniel wasn't just a regular guy. He worked at a fertility clinic. A small, insignificant detail at first, but one that changed everything. He had access to medical samples, years of experience handling them. And he never intended to be a father. From the very beginning, he made sure Ada's children weren't biologically his. He knew exactly what he was doing. He waited, played the long game, knowing that one day, he would have his moment. And when the time came, he set the trap, and she walked right into it. By the time I met Ada, she had nothing left. I wasn't her friend, not even a distant relative, just another patient in the same hospital room. She was quiet at first. Just a woman with tired eyes and a body too weak to sit up for long. But one night, when the hospital was silent except for the hum of machines, she told me everything. She didn't want justice. She didn't expect to be believed. She just wanted someone, anyone, to know the truth. And then, as if fate wasn't cruel enough, Daniel came to see her one last time. I wasn't awake for most of it, but I remember hearing his voice, low and almost mocking. When she told me later what he had said, I felt sick. He told her how he had planned it all. How he had despised her from the start. How he had manipulated her, taken everything, and left her with nothing. And then he walked away. Ada passed away not long after. Alone. Unheard. Daniel moved on, just like that. No consequences. No suspicions. He played the perfect role, and no one questioned it. But I refuse to let her story die with her. Somewhere out there, Ada's children are growing up believing their mother was a liar. Somewhere, Daniel is living his life without guilt, without regret. But maybe, just maybe, if enough people hear this story, he won't get away with it forever. Top comments. 1. This is absolutely horrifying. The way he manipulated everything from the start. It's like he was setting up a chessboard, and she never even knew she was playing. 2. If this is true, there has to be a way to investigate. Even if it's years later, DNA records exist. Fertility clinics keep samples on file. If someone could get access. 3. Unfortunately, unless someone comes forward with proof, guys like this slip through the cracks. And if he's done it once, I highly doubt he stopped at Ada. 4. I hope Ada's kids find out one day. Maybe then, they can reclaim their mother's name. 5. I met someone once, a man who reminded me of Daniel. He worked in a similar place. Now I'm wondering if it was him. Hey, everyone. It's been 2 years since I first shared Ada's story. I wish I could say I've moved on, that time has softened the horror of what she went through. But it hasn't. Some things stay with you. Some stories haunt you. And for me, Ada's has never left my mind. I think about her every day. Because in a strange, twisted way, I feel like I was meant to hear her story. Maybe because I'm one of the few who still remembers her. Maybe because, like her, I've been fighting my own battle. I never told you this, but I've been struggling with cancer. It's part of the reason I was in that hospital to begin with. At the time, I thought I wouldn't make it either. But somehow, I did. I survived. And now, 2 years later, I'm still here. Ada wasn't as lucky. But her story isn't over yet. After posting Ada's story, I spent months trying to piece together the missing parts. I had no connections, no real way to dig deeper, but something kept pushing me forward. And the more I uncovered, the more sickening it became. See, Daniel wasn't just cruel, he was calculated. Every move he made had a purpose. He wasn't simply trying to ruin Ada's life. He was experimenting. That's right. Experimenting. Ada was never meant to be his wife. She was a test subject. The fact that he worked at a fertility clinic wasn't a coincidence. He had access to things most people wouldn't even dream of. And he used that access in ways that should never be allowed. He never wanted to father children. Not with Ada, not with anyone. From the very beginning, he made sure that the children she bore weren't biologically his. He went to disturbing lengths to achieve that, preparing himself before their nights together to ensure that his DNA was never passed on. It wasn't just revenge. It was a statement. Ada had come from privilege. He had come from suffering. And in his twisted mind, he was proving that people like her didn't deserve to carry his legacy. He had done it so flawlessly that even when the truth came out, no one believed her. But it didn't stop there. Because Daniel wasn't just playing a game with Ada. He had bigger plans. Ada told me, in her weakest moments, that she believed she was just one of many. That Daniel wasn't finished. That whatever he had done to her, he had done before, and would do again. And when I started looking into him, I found something chilling. There were whispers. Rumors. News reports that seemed unconnected at first but, when put together, told a terrifying story. A rise in missing persons cases. Wealthy individuals disappearing without a trace. Some were later found, sick, disoriented, with no memory of what had happened to them. Others were never found at all. And the worst part? Many of these victims had last been seen interacting with a man matching Daniel's description. He had taken everything from Ada. But it wasn't enough for him. He wanted more. There's something else I haven't told you. Ada wasn't just suffering from cancer. She had another illness, one that Daniel had made sure she would never recover from. The way he looked at her in that hospital room, the way he leaned in and whispered the truth to her, I knew then that what had happened to her wasn't random. She hadn't simply gotten sick. He had made sure she did. I don't know how. I don't know when. But he had done something to her, something that left her too weak to fight back, too isolated to tell her side of the story. And as I lay in my own hospital bed, fighting for my own life, I couldn't stop wondering. How many more people like Ada were out there? How many more lives had he destroyed? After she passed, I made a promise. I would find her children. And after 2 years, I finally did. It wasn't easy. They had been placed in an orphanage, their names changed, their past erased. But I found them. I adopted them. They don't know the full truth yet. They only know that their mother loved them. That she fought for them. That she never betrayed them. One day, when they're old enough, I'll tell them everything. But for now, all I can do is protect them. Because I don't think this story is over. Not yet. And if Daniel is still out there, doing what I think he's doing, this time, someone has to stop him. Top comments. This is absolutely chilling. I can't believe people like Daniel exist in real life. Are there any authorities involved now? As someone who has worked in the medical field, the way he did this is terrifying. It would take planning, access, and a complete lack of conscience. I hope Ada's children grow up knowing their mother wasn't what the world made her out to be. She deserved better. If there are other victims, someone out there knows something. Keep digging. I was in a similar situation once. Different details, same manipulation. This kind of evil is real. And it doesn't stop unless people stand up against it. This story isn't just about Ada anymore. It's about how many people like her exist, people whose voices were silenced, whose lives were ruined. If Daniel is still out there, someone, somewhere, will remember. And this time, he won't get away with it. New update, guys. It's happening again. I knew Daniel wasn't finished. I knew Ada wasn't his only victim. But I didn't expect to hear about another case so soon, and in such a strange, terrifying way. A few weeks ago, a woman named Sophia came forward. She had sued Daniel for child support. Why? Because she was sure, absolutely sure, that he was the father of her 3-year-old son. She had been in a relationship with him for nearly 4 years. He was charming, attentive, and loving, or so she thought. When she found out she was pregnant, he seemed happy. He never pushed her to get a paternity test. In fact, he was the one who suggested keeping the baby, saying he wanted to do things right. But as soon as the baby was born, things changed. Daniel slowly distanced himself, making excuses, avoiding responsibilities, until one day, he simply vanished. No contact, no explanation, just gone. Sophia, struggling as a single mom, finally decided to take him to court. If he wanted to run, fine. But he wasn't going to get away with abandoning his own child. She was confident the DNA test would prove he was the father. She had been faithful. She never drank, never partied, never cheated. There was no other option. It had to be Daniel. Until the test came back. And the results? 0% match. Daniel wasn't the father. She was devastated. Confused. Because if Daniel wasn't the father, then who was? Sophia refused to accept it. She demanded another test. A mistake, a lab mix-up, anything. But the second test came back the same. Daniel was not related to the child. The judge dismissed the case, and Daniel walked away scot-free. Sophia was left questioning her own reality. She knew she hadn't been with anyone else. There was no one who could possibly be the father. And that's when I heard about her case. When I saw the details, my stomach dropped. Because I knew exactly what had happened. Daniel had done to her what he did to Ada. But this time, he had gotten even better at covering his tracks. I reached out to Sophia. At first, she didn't believe me. Who would? Imagine being told that the man you trusted had intentionally made sure your child wasn't his, without you even knowing. It sounded insane. But when I told her about Ada, when I explained what he had done before, she started connecting the dots. She remembered little things, times when Daniel insisted on certain medical procedures, how he always made sure their nights together were on his terms, how he never seemed worried about pregnancy even though they barely talked about birth control. And then she remembered something chilling. One night, she woke up feeling off. Groggy. Disoriented. Like she had been drugged. Daniel had been there. He told her she was just tired. That she had been stressed. She believed him. But now? Now she wasn't so sure. Because she was realizing the same thing Ada had realized too late. New update, guys. It's happening again. I knew Daniel wasn't finished. I knew Ada wasn't his only victim. But I didn't expect to hear about another case so soon, and in such a strange, terrifying way. A few weeks ago, a woman named Sophia came forward. She had sued Daniel for child support. Why? Because she was sure, absolutely sure, that he was the father of her 3-year-old son. She had been in a relationship with him for nearly 4 years. He was charming, attentive, and loving, or so she thought. When she found out she was pregnant, he seemed happy. He never pushed her to get a paternity test. In fact, he was the one who suggested keeping the baby, saying he wanted to do things right. But as soon as the baby was born, things changed. Daniel slowly distanced himself, making excuses, avoiding responsibilities, until one day, he simply vanished. No contact, no explanation, just gone. Sophia, struggling as a single mom, finally decided to take him to court. If he wanted to run, fine. But he wasn't going to get away with abandoning his own child. She was confident the DNA test would prove he was the father. She had been faithful. She never drank, never partied, never cheated. There was no other option. It had to be Daniel. Until the test came back. And the results? 0% match. Daniel wasn't the father. She was devastated. Confused. Because if Daniel wasn't the father, then who was? Sophia refused to accept it. She demanded another test. A mistake, a lab mix-up, anything. But the second test came back the same. Daniel was not related to the child. The judge dismissed the case, and Daniel walked away scot-free. Sophia was left questioning her own reality. She knew she hadn't been with anyone else. There was no one who could possibly be the father. And that's when I heard about her case. When I saw the details, my stomach dropped. Because I knew exactly what had happened. Daniel had done to her what he did to Ada. But this time, he had gotten even better at covering his tracks. I reached out to Sophia. At first, she didn't believe me. Who would? Imagine being told that the man you trusted had intentionally made sure your child wasn't his, without you even knowing. It sounded insane. But when I told her about Ada, when I explained what he had done before, she started connecting the dots. She remembered little things, times when Daniel insisted on certain medical procedures, how he always made sure their nights together were on his terms, how he never seemed worried about pregnancy even though they barely talked about birth control. And then she remembered something chilling. One night, she woke up feeling off. Groggy. Disoriented. Like she had been drugged. Daniel had been there. He told her she was just tired. That she had been stressed. She believed him. But now? Now she wasn't so sure. Because she was realizing the same thing Ada had realized too late. After hearing Sophia's story and realizing how deep this went, I knew we couldn't just let it go. She was hesitant at first. Who would believe us? A woman who had just been humiliated in court and a cancer patient still fighting for her life? But we had to try. We gathered everything, Ada's story, Sophia's lawsuit, the DNA test results, and went straight to the police. At first, they didn't take us seriously. Daniel had covered his tracks too well. He wasn't just smart, he was careful. He always operated in the shadows, making sure no direct evidence could ever link back to him. But then we got a breakthrough. While the police were skeptical about our claims, one officer decided to dig a little deeper. They reached out to the fertility clinic where Daniel used to work. And that's when everything changed. The clinic had a long history of missing samples. Over the years, they had noticed irregularities, sperm samples disappearing, records being altered, patient files missing crucial details. They suspected internal theft but had never been able to pinpoint the culprit. It had been going on for years. And guess who had access to those samples? Daniel. He had been using his position to tamper with records, swap samples, and manipulate pregnancies, all without anyone realizing it. When the police finally put all the pieces together, they had enough to arrest him. When they brought him in for questioning, Daniel was disturbingly calm. He didn't deny anything. In fact, he smirked as they laid out the evidence. And then, in a chilling moment, he leaned back and said, "Took you long enough." He knew it was coming. But what shook us the most was what he said next. This was never about the money. Never about revenge. It was about control. About proving a point. He saw himself as some kind of mastermind, playing with people's lives like a twisted experiment. And worst of all? He admitted that there were more victims. The police are still uncovering the full extent of Daniel's crimes. So far, multiple women have come forward, each with eerily similar stories, relationships that seemed perfect at first, pregnancies that didn't make sense, children who weren't biologically theirs. Some of these women never even knew they were victims. Some of them had already disappeared. We don't know how far this goes. But one thing is certain, Daniel wasn't just a manipulator. He wasn't just a liar. He was a predator. And now, he's finally behind bars. Sophia is trying to move on. She's relieved that Daniel has been caught, but the damage he left behind will never fully heal. As for me, I'm still fighting my own battle. The cancer came back. I had beaten it once, and I'm believing I'll beat it again. But this fight feels different now. I'm not just fighting for myself anymore. I'm fighting for Ada. For Sophia. For every woman Daniel hurt. And for the ones who never got to tell their story. Justice took time. Too much time. But in the end, the truth won. It had been a year since Daniel was arrested. A year since the truth came out. Since Sophia and I had fought to bring him to justice. But even with him locked away, something still didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the therapist in me, the part of me that had once dedicated my life to understanding human behavior. Or maybe it was because my own time was running out. The cancer had spread. The doctors were trying, but deep down, I knew. I didn't have long. And before I left this world, I needed to know why. Why did Daniel do what he did? Why destroy Ada? Why ruin so many lives? Was it just revenge, or was there something deeper? So, against all logic, I reached out. And Daniel agreed to see me. Prison had changed him. Not in the way you'd hope. Not in the way that brings redemption. When I sat across from him in that cold, gray room, he smiled. Like he had been expecting me. So, he said, leaning back in his chair. You want to know my story? And then, for the first time, he told the truth. His mother had been just a girl when her life was ripped away. Kidnapped. Assaulted by men who thought it was fun. Rich men who had no consequences to fear. She escaped, but the damage was done. When she realized she was pregnant, she didn't see a child. She saw a curse. A reminder of what had been done to her. And so, when Daniel was born, she made sure he suffered. She never called him her son. She never gave him love. Instead, she charged the same kind of perverted men to do to him what had been done to her. Over and over again. She told him he was disgusting. That he was filth. That he deserved it because he came from monsters. By the time he was a teenager, he believed her. And he hated the world for it. I never wanted to be a father, Daniel admitted, his voice eerily calm. I never wanted to create life. I wanted to destroy it. Everything he did, every manipulation, every twisted plan, was his way of taking back control. He targeted the rich because they had taken everything from his mother. But he also targeted women because they had never protected him. They watched, he whispered, his eyes dark. They knew. And they did nothing. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. That not all women were like his mother. That not all rich people were evil. But looking at him, I knew it wouldn't matter. Daniel had spent his entire life shaped by hate. There was no saving him. Before I left, he asked me one question. Do you feel sorry for me? I looked at him, the broken little boy hiding inside a monster. And I told him the truth. I feel sorry for the child you were. Not the man you chose to become. As I walked away, I realized something. I had come for closure. But there would never be closure. Not for Ada. Not for Sophia. Not for the countless others he had hurt. Some wounds never heal. But at least now, I understood. Daniel's trial was one of the most shocking and disturbing cases the court had ever seen. The evidence was overwhelming: missing clinic samples, forged records, testimonies from multiple victims, and the twisted puzzle pieces that, when put together, revealed the extent of his crimes. But it wasn't just the crimes that left the courtroom in stunned silence. It was his complete lack of remorse. Throughout the trial, Daniel sat there, smirking, unfazed, indifferent. Even as victim after victim took the stand. Even as Ada's story was told. Even as forensic psychologists painted the horrifying picture of how childhood trauma had created a man without empathy. A man who saw people as pawns. A man who had orchestrated pain not just out of revenge, but out of pure, calculated cruelty. When the jury deliberated, they didn't take long. Because there was no doubt. Daniel was found guilty on all charges. Fraud. Medical malpractice. Abuse. Assault. Endangerment. The list went on. And when it was time for sentencing, the judge, an older man who had seen his fair share of criminals, didn't hold back. This court has seen many monsters, the judge said, his voice cold. But rarely do we see one as methodical, as calculated, and as entirely without conscience as you. Daniel just smiled. Like it was a joke to him. But no one was laughing. The judge slammed the gavel down. Life without parole. The courtroom erupted. Victims crying. Families hugging. Some relieved, some still shattered. Daniel? He just grinned. Because in his mind, he had still won. With Daniel behind bars, some of his victims found closure. Some didn't. Sophia and I? We kept in touch, but life was never the same. As for me, well, I don't know how much time I have left. But I do know this: Ada's story didn't die in silence. And neither did the truth.